On the coldest Christmas night in decades, the iron gates of the most secluded estate in upstate New York groaned open for the first time in 20 years. The man standing at the window, Marcus Thorne, watched the snow fall with a gaze as cold and unyielding as the ice clinging to the trellis. His silhouette, a sharp contrast against the warmth of the fireplace he never bothered to light. He was a man who had built an empire on steel and silence, burying his past beneath billions of dollars and a reputation for ruthlessness. Yet tonight, his hand trembled as he held a glass of scotch he had no intention of drinking. Down below, amidst the swirling white darkness that had swallowed the driveway, a solitary figure stood motionless under the flickering amber glow of the security lantern. It was a woman, her coat threadbare against the biting wind, clutching something small and spherical to her chest as if it were the only source of heat in the world. Marcus leaned closer to the glass, his breath fogging the pain, because the way she tilted her head just slightly to the left struck a chord of memory so painful he almost dropped his glass. A soft, terrified whisper escaped his lips, a question he hadn't dared to ask the universe since he was a boy of 16. "Do you remember me?" The woman did not move toward the intercom, nor did she retreat from the imposing security of the estate. She simply waited with a patience that felt ancient. Her face was obscured by the shadows of her hood, looking up at the mansion, as if she could see straight through the stone walls and into the hollow chest of the man watching her. It defied all logic, for the person Marcus was thinking of, the girl who had owned that specific tilt of the head and that quiet stillness, had vanished off the face of the earth 2 decades ago during a storm that the locals still spoke of in hushed tones. To see her silhouette now, standing there like a ghost summoned by the anniversary of a tragedy, sent a shockwave of adrenaline and fear coursing through his veins that money could not suppress. He had spent 20 years running from this exact moment. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Marcus turned from the window, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, and began the long walk down the grand staircase, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous, empty hall. As he walked, his mind raced through the impossibilities, forcing him to confront the questions that had haunted his nightmares for half a lifetime. Who is she really, and why did she choose this specific night to appear? If it is a trick, it is a cruel one, designed by someone who knows the deepest architecture of his grief. Tonight, we uncover the secrets that lie hidden in the snow and time. To understand the magnitude of this moment, we have to leave the marble halls of the Thorne estate and go back to where it all began, in the humble, dusty streets of a small town in South Carolina called Oak Creek. Marcus wasn't born a billionaire. He was born the son of a factory worker, raised in a drafty shotgun house by a grandmother who smelled of chicory coffee and old paper, a woman who told stories not to entertain, but to survive. She spoke of winter spirits and the weight of destiny, teaching young Marcus that life was a series of seasons and that the harshest winters were merely preparations for the most resilient springs. It was in this world of hand-me-down clothes that he met Sarah, a girl who lived 3 houses down. Sarah was known by the elders as a child blessed by winter, because she was born during a freak snowstorm in a place that rarely saw ice, and she carried a quiet, observant demeanor that made people trust her with their secrets. They were inseparable, 2 lonely souls, forging a bond in the red clay dirt, promising each other that no matter how hard life got, they would be the family the other one lacked. Their bond was cemented by a specific tradition that they held sacred, a ritual that defied the poverty surrounding them. Every Christmas Eve, they would meet at the old water tower at the edge of town to exchange gifts that cost nothing but meant everything. One year, when they were 16, Marcus saved every penny he earned from sweeping the floors at the local diner to buy Sarah a snow globe, a cheap plastic thing featuring a generic winter scene. But to them, it was a masterpiece. He gave it to her with a handwritten note tucked inside the base, a promise that he would build her a real house just like the one in the globe, a place where the cold could never hurt them. It was a promise made with the fierce, naive intensity of first love. But life in Oak Creek had a way of crushing dreams, and Sarah carried a burden she never shared with Marcus, a family secret that weighed on her shoulders like lead. Then came the inciting incident, the night that cleaved their timeline in two and left a scar that would never fully heal. It was Christmas Eve, 20 years ago, and a blizzard of historic proportions was battering the East Coast, sending temperatures plummeting and turning the familiar streets of Oak Creek into a treacherous, frozen labyrinth. Marcus stood at the base of the water tower, the wind whipping through his thin coat, clutching a small velvet box containing a locket he had stolen money to buy. A desperate, foolish gesture to convince her to run away with him that very night. He checked his watch every 30 seconds, the minutes ticking by with agonizing slowness, turning from anticipation to worry, and then to a cold, hard dread. Sarah was never late. She was the anchor, the constant, the one who respected their time together more than anything else. An hour passed, then two, the snow piling up around his boots, burying the world in white silence. And still, she did not come. When Marcus finally couldn't stand the waiting anymore, he ran to her house, his lungs burning from the icy air, slipping on the black ice that coated the asphalt. The house was dark, the windows staring back like dead eyes, with no sign of movement, no smoke rising from the chimney, and the front door locked tight. He pounded on the wood until his knuckles bled, screaming her name into the howling wind. The next morning, the town awoke to the news that Sarah and her grandmother were gone, their meager belongings left behind. No note, no forwarding address, just a void where a family used to be. The rumors started immediately. Some said they had moved north, others whispered about debts owed to bad men. But Marcus knew in his soul that she wouldn't have left without saying goodbye, not after the promise, not after the snow globe. If this part is making sense to you, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." Let's see who's really watching to this point. For the next 2 decades, Marcus channeled every ounce of his grief and rage into a singular pursuit of power, believing that if he became rich enough, he could control his destiny and never feel helpless again. He left Oak Creek 3 days after she vanished, hitchhiking his way to New York with nothing but the clothes on his back and a heart that had turned to stone. He worked 20-hour days, ruthlessly climbing the corporate ladder, investing with a cold precision that terrified his competitors, eventually building a technology empire that revolutionized the way the world communicated. Yet, despite his billions, he lived like a monk in that massive estate, refusing to celebrate Christmas, refusing to let anyone get close. Which brings us back to the present moment, to Marcus standing at the heavy oak door of his mansion, his hand hovering over the bronze handle, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He pulled the door open, the hinges protesting against the disuse, and was immediately hit by a gust of freezing wind and snow that swirled into the foyer. The woman was still there, standing at the bottom of the steps, looking up at him with eyes that were older, sadder, but unmistakably Sarah's. She didn't speak at first. She simply walked up the steps, her movements stiff and pained, and held out the object she had been clutching. It was the snow globe, the cheap, plastic snow globe he had given her when they were 16. The sight of it broke something inside Marcus, a dam of suppressed emotion that he had spent 20 years reinforcing, and he fell to his knees right there in the doorway. "I kept it," she whispered, her voice raspy as if she hadn't used it in a long time. "I kept the promise." Marcus looked up at her, tears streaming down his face, his mind struggling to reconcile the gray in her hair and the lines of suffering etched around her mouth with the image of the girl he kept in his memory. "Where were you?" he choked out, the question that had defined his life finally given voice. "Why didn't you come?" Sarah's expression softened into a look of profound sorrow, and she reached out a gloved hand to touch his face, a gesture so familiar it felt like a physical blow. "I didn't leave, Marcus," she said, her words hanging in the cold air like steam. "I never left Oak Creek. I was there the whole time." The revelation hit him like a physical blow, confusing him more than the silence ever had. How could she have been there? He had searched. He had hired private investigators years later, who found nothing. The truth she revealed in the warmth of his library, wrapped in blankets while the fire finally roared to life, was a story of tragedy and confinement that was far more painful than any abandonment. Sarah explained that on that night, the night of the blizzard, her grandmother had suffered a severe stroke that left her incapacitated, and Sarah, in her panic to get help, had fallen down the cellar stairs, sustaining a head injury that triggered a rare, dormant neurological condition in her family line. She hadn't run away. She had slipped into a state of semi-catatonic paralysis, trapped in her own body, unable to move or speak, hidden away by a grandmother who, in her confused and partially recovered state, believed that Sarah was being punished by spirits and needed to be hidden from the doctors who would experiment on her. For 20 years, Sarah had lived in the back room of that house, cared for by a rotation of secretive church elders who respected her grandmother's wishes, existing in a twilight state where she could hear the world but couldn't participate in it. The miracle was not magic. It was the death of the grandmother 2 weeks ago, which led to a state social worker finally entering the home and discovering Sarah. With proper medical attention and medication, she had truly woken up for the first time in 2 decades. She looked at Marcus, her eyes filled with tears. "I heard you," she said softly. "That night, when you pounded on the door, I heard you screaming my name. I was just 10 feet away." Marcus sat in stunned silence, the weight of his anger evaporating, replaced by an overwhelming wave of compassion and regret. He had spent 20 years hating her for leaving, hating the world for taking her, while she had been fighting a silent battle just out of his reach. He realized then that his suffering, his loneliness in this mansion, was nothing compared to the endurance she had shown. He took the snow globe from the table, turned it over, and peeled back the tape on the bottom to reveal the note he had written so long ago, the yellowed paper fragile in his hands. He read the words aloud, his voice cracking. "No matter what happens, no matter how far you go, I will build a home for us." He looked at Sarah, then at the vast, empty mansion around them. He had built the house, but he had forgotten to build the home. The resolution of their story didn't happen overnight. There was no magical fix that erased 20 years of trauma, but there was a beginning. Marcus used his resources to get Sarah the best medical care in the world, helping her regain her strength and mobility. But more importantly, he spent every day with her, learning who she was now, not who she had been. They spent that Christmas sitting by the fire, talking until sunrise, filling in the blanks of the lost years. As spring approached, the snow melted from the estate grounds, revealing the gardens Marcus had never looked at, and for the first time, he saw the potential for life in the barren soil. He and Sarah decided to turn the estate into a foundation for people suffering from rare neurological disorders, transforming the fortress of isolation into a beacon of hope. They didn't get their youth back, and they couldn't rewrite the past, but they had the present, and they had the promise. The story of the Billionaire and the Snow Maiden became a new legend in Oak Creek, not a story of ghosts, but a story of second chances. It reminds us that sometimes the people we think have abandoned us are fighting battles we can't see, and that love, if it is true, can survive even the longest, coldest winters. So, I leave you with this question to reflect on tonight. Is there someone in your life you have hardened your heart against because of a misunderstanding or a silence you didn't understand? What would happen if you reached out, if you chose curiosity over judgment and forgiveness over pride? Life is too short, and the winters are too long to leave the words unsaid. If this story touched you, please leave a comment below with your thoughts. I read every single one. If you believe in second chances, share this video with someone who needs to hear it. And finally, if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories that explore the human heart. Until next time, keep your promises and keep the lantern lit.